It's a few days before Christmas. The residents of a small Scottish town prepare for the holidays. Danger is fast approaching.
The street was on fire, lawns were on fire, and houses were on fire.
I had never seen anything like that.
Christmas is just going to be remembered for all the wrong reasons.
A devastating plane crash shatters a village and captures the attention of the world.
It was one of the most significant terrorist attacks in history.
The mystery is finally cracked by a piece of debris smaller than a fingertip. October the 26th, 1988, near Düsseldorf. For weeks, German police have been following a group of suspected terrorists around the ancient town of Neuss. Today, they'll make their move. In the trunk of their car, police make an unusual discovery.
Berühren Sie es nicht.
Police raid apartments used by the two men. They find a number of blank passports and a small arsenal of weapons. When police closely examine the radio recovered from their car, they find it's wired with explosives.
Those devices used a combination of an improvised barometric device and a timer, a short delay timer. All these devices were, in fact, supposed to go onto an aircraft.
A barometric timer is set off by changes in altitude. It's triggered when it reaches a certain height. Since that guarantees a plane will be in the air when the bomb goes off, it's a favorite device for those targeting passenger jets. The two men arrested in Germany work for a well-known terrorist organization, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine.
Leader of the PFLP-GC, Ahmed Jibril, made a speech in Libya in 1986, and one of the things he said was that until there's peace in the Middle East, there would be no safety for anyone traveling on an American or an Israeli airliner.
Hafez Dalkamouni is shipping weapons to Syria and Lebanon. Marwan Krishat is a notorious bomb maker, responsible for bringing down at least one passenger jet. It's just a couple of months until the busy Christmas travel season. With the two men under arrest, German police have made commercial aviation a little safer. Two months later, Pan Am Flight 103 is on its way from London to New York. The jet has just taken off from Heathrow Airport. There are 259 people on board. Most of the passengers are American. Charles McKee actually works for the US government. Khalid Jafar lives in Detroit and is returning home from a trip to Lebanon and Germany. The first part of the trip to the United States takes the plane northwest up over Scotland. The so-called Daventry departure is one of 6 preset routes that jets follow on their way out of Heathrow. Lockerbie is one of several small towns the plane will pass over. Tucked away in the Scottish lowlands, residents are barely aware that they live below a busy aerial highway. Pan Am calls this 747 Clipper Made of the Seas. As it levels off at 31,000 feet, the crew gets in touch with air traffic control.
Good evening, Scottish. Clipper 103, we are level at 310.
103, you are identified.
Captain James Macquarie is 55 years old. Like many passengers on this pre-holiday flight, he's heading home. Five miles below, the people of Lockerbie prepare for Christmas. Michael Gordon is chatting with a friend when a strange rumbling noise fills his house.
Hang on, there's something odd outside here.
The weather that night was a bit wild. There was a fairly strong westerly wind, and I could hear it hitting the window in front of me. From my window I can see Lockerbie because my house sits up on the hill. And I heard this noise which was above the noise of the wind, and the noise sounded like thunder. And the noise got louder and louder. And I could hear the noise then got to the stage of being similar to a jet fighter. And at that time we had a lot of military aircraft passing through the area. However, I saw dark objects, dark things falling from the sky. Against the lights of Lockerbie, I could see these black objects coming down. And then, from my right, quite high on my right, I could see a long, thin, black object which had a fire on the upper surface coming in. And it was making its way towards Lockerbie. When it hit, there was the most horrendous explosion, and I could hear the tiles on the roof of my house lifting.
Hello? Hello?
When the explosion took place, the telephone line stopped functioning.
Lockerbie is burning. Enormous flames reach into the night sky. Michael Gordon races to the neighborhood that is hardest hit.
The street was on fire, the lawns were on fire, and houses were on fire. And it was difficult to go without finding my trousers burning and my shoes burning. You had to jump about quite a bit because everything was on fire. But I remember at that point finding an airline ticket, and it was perfectly intact. There's no damage by fire or fuel or contamination of any sort. And the airline ticket said London Heathrow to JFK.
Somehow, Pan Am Flight 103 has fallen from the sky and smashed into Lockerbie, Scotland. In the daylight, the full horror of the crash of Pan Am Flight 103 is obvious. Several houses on the ground have simply vanished, vaporized when the plane smashed into them. An enormous crater is torn through the southern edge of the town. 1,500 tons of rock and earth have been blasted out of the ground. 11 people from Lockerbie are dead, along with all 259 people who were on board.
As far as I know, I've lost my brother-in-law, my sister-in-law, and their house is just a 30-foot crater.
In the ruins of their homes, they search for the bodies of the aircraft's passengers. Such a catastrophe, so sudden, so great a shock for a quiet town.
It looked like a scene out of hell. This whole road was ablaze.
Didn't know what it was, and then we rushed outside and just all this debris coming down.
Air crash investigators have arrived in Lockerbie within hours of the crash. Mick Charles is the lead inspector for the British Air Accidents Investigation Branch, the AAIB.
One of the first sites we went to was the site of the crater that was still smelling very much of aviation fuel for a start, and scattered all around were bits of debris and in some cases human tissue as well.
Charles quickly gathers his team to begin looking for clues.
It was all heaving, it was happening, there were loads of people, and it was to some extent chaos.
You'll be organised into groups, headed by an AAIB inspector. Does anyone have any questions? The sooner we start, the better.
More than 1,000 police officers and 600 members of the military pour into Lockerbie.
You always have this sense of wanting to get to grips with what it is. It was quite clear that whatever it was colossal.
Any debris that's found is put into clear plastic bags and left to be collected later. Dark bags are used to store human remains. It's just days before Christmas, but the holiday spirit has been shattered.
At the start of the investigation, what we were doing was finding out which bits of the aeroplane were where, actually finding all the aeroplane.
The sheer scale of the disaster is difficult to comprehend.
Chris, the RAF have offered us a helicopter. Can we use it?
Absolutely.
With so much wreckage being found, investigators need to get a bird's-eye view and locate the largest fields of debris.
The maps of that area were a very short supply, and we ran out of them very quickly, so we had to use black and white photocopies initially.
Investigators bring local police officer Michael Gordon with them to help in the search.
The intention was for me to be able to identify geographical landmarks and identify parts of the aircraft.
They soon get a better sense of their enormous task.
When we were in the helicopter, we could see that the wreckage came out in a cone shape, emanating from Lockerbie, and the cone shape got wider and wider the further from Lockerbie.
The principal feature that I was looking for was to try to establish some pattern of the wreckage which would basically help me direct the ground investigators.
They're shocked by what they find. Pieces of the plane are scattered over an area larger than all of London. More than 2,000 square kilometers. It quickly becomes clear that Pan Am 103 was coming apart long before it hit the ground.
Normally, you're seeing a fairly contained accident site. In Lockerbie, it was nothing like that, because initially the police had identified half a dozen discrete sites.
A 747 is made up of more than 6 million parts. In the mangled remains of the jet, investigators need to find the one that will tell them what happened. The plane's cockpit is eerie proof that Pan Am Flight 103 broke apart in mid-air. Severed from the rest of the plane, it's 4 kilometers east of the city.
When looking at the cockpit, I was looking at the roof of it, and the windows were intact. The actual nose part had cracked open, but it was as if it had been chopped off just after the cabin, and you could walk around the back and look into the cabin section from the back.
Inside the cockpit, investigators note the positions of various switches and controls. They find the autopilot is on and the oxygen masks are still stowed.
This is a fairly standard procedure which we would do in any such investigation. The end result was that there was nothing at all untoward found in the cockpit. Everything was consistent with cruising flight.
Soon, investigators discover why the damage to Lockerbie was so devastating.
The main wreckage which fell on the town of Lockerbie was the wing, which is basically both the left and right wing, complete with a structure in the middle.
Investigators estimate that the plane was loaded down with 90,000 kilograms of fuel.
$150 tons, descending essentially vertically at up to about 500 knots speed, and there's an awful lot of energy in that. And that's what created the crater.
To find the cause of the crash, however, investigators will have to look elsewhere. They need to examine wreckage found south of Lockerbie. These pieces would have come off at the beginning of the disaster. While the painstaking work of collecting evidence continues, investigators comb through maintenance records. Those records raise concerns with the plane's age. Clipper Made of the Seas was the 15th 747 ever built by Boeing.
This was one of the older Boeing 747s. It was built in 1970, so it was 18 years old and had got something like 75,000 flying hours.
Perhaps some critical part of the plane had given way as it flew over Lockerbie.
The two obvious possibilities were that it was a straightforward structural failure, or it was possibly the result of sabotage.
McCharles, Tom Thurman, FBI.
Good to meet you, Tom. I was expecting you.
While the investigators are searching for possible answers in the history of the plane, the second possibility, sabotage, is also being pursued.
We were there to provide technical expertise to the Scottish investigators into explosives and explosive damage, and that the telltale sign that it could be a bomb.
Just 3.5 years before Lockerbie, a bomb had brought down an Air India jet just off the Irish coast. In that case, the plane and vital clues sunk deep to the bottom of the sea. But the wreckage of the Pan Am flight litters the Scottish lowlands. If it was a bomb, there's a chance that important evidence can be found.
What kind of logistical effort is it going to take to find everything, and I mean everything, and bring it back to a location to be able to look at it and come to some conclusion? With the fragments that we found on the ground, we were picking those up. We were looking for blast damage on these pieces of metal. But until we found something that said it was a bomb, physical evidence, it was an accident.
We were very mindful of the fact that there was plenty of reports